Presentation this evening is about data, is about student test scores and teacher evaluations and my commentary as we go throughout. So feel free to stop me with any questions. But back in the old days when I started teaching, assessments were pretty clear. And I love this analogy. I give it all the time. Formative is to summative as a physical is to an autopsy. When do you want to know? Formative exams are what we used to think of as quizzes or little unit exams where you get some feedback. Teachers can change the way they teach and help students in things they don't understand. In this country and this state, we rarely use formative exams to look at anything. We are very big on summative, the end of the year, cumulative, the end test. That's what we look at. Unfortunately, once those tests are given, you cannot change instruction. It is what it is. So a Regents exam is a good example. You either pass it or you fail it. And if you fail it, you can't graduate in some cases. So they become high stakes. Really not so much for 3 to 8. Really nothing's going to happen to you if you don't pass a third grade ELA test. So the real weight of the exams in this state are the Regents exams. Many years ago, when the state announced that it was going to change the way it gave exams and change the test, we embraced as a district NWEA. And the reason we embraced that is because it's 2 exams. It's one in the fall where we benchmark kids. We set up where their performance is in the fall, and then we check in again in June, May or June, to say, well, how'd you do? We actually do it 3 times. We give one in the winter as a mid-year. But the idea is it's kind of formative. It gives us information to change instruction to help children. In this district, we've gone really formative. We're going to have to think of a new word for it because we can really do that on a daily basis. The advent of technology has allowed us to look at student work every day and organize it by standards. So we really have a good snapshot of where kids are and how they're different. The other thing that NWEA does is it predicts. It's a national exam, so it can look across the country and say, this is where your child should be if they're 6.3 years old compared to the rest of the country. And we would anticipate, based on all the children in the country, they would grow this many points. And that's called a target growth. It's similar to the concept of what the state is trying to do in their yearly exams. It's much more difficult, though. When you start in the beginning and test in the end, it's easier to see if you made a target. So we're going to look at NWEA data first. We look at a quadrant report. It's called a quadrant report. I can jump right into the colors. There's 4 distinct groups children fit in. The first one is proficiency, below the line, above the line. A lot of the exams are 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, you're not proficient. A 3 and 4, you're proficient. They change that line between the 2 and 3, so a lot of children fluctuate between a 2 one year or 3 another year. It's a moving target. What NWEA did was it moved the percentage up to match the New York State exams. So when we speak about proficiency in NWEA, we're not talking about a national norm. We're talking about only New York State, which is about 20 percentage points higher than the rest of the country. So they're trying to align the 2 exams. And the other thing we look at is growth. So I said before, that target growth, we can anticipate what each student should do in a given year based on the rest of the country, so we can look to say how many students are meeting that growth and how many aren't. So there's two different ways to look at the numbers. You can look at it north-south, or you can look at it east-west. So another way to look at it is, the yellow, in this case, the yellow and the green, children are growing. The red number is really the poorest. They're not growing. They're not proficient. There's something going on there. The two growing is, growth is important. Not every child jumps from a 2 to a 3. But if you go from a low 2 to a high 2, you still grew in that year. There was some evidence of change in that year. Wow, that looks small. So this is Meadow Drive on the top, Hampton on the bottom, reading. The numbers in the boxes only represent the second grade. The exam we give for K and 1 is we don't measure growth the same way. We don't measure proficiency the same way. So do I have a little pointer on this thing? Ooh, that was bad. Okay. That was bad too. I don't have a little pointer on this thing. So the growth numbers typically in kindergarten and first grade are huge. So if you look at the lines, it says K, it gives you a number, student count, and then 92% growth. Then first grade is 79, and Hampton it's 94 and 84. Those numbers are typical. The growth numbers when you're younger, meeting the targets, very typical. Kids are sponges, and they grow and they meet throughout the year. The proficiency numbers are lower. Mm-hmm. So you see proficiency for Meadow is 40%, and proficiency for Hampton's 27 in reading. So this is the beginning of our situation in Mineola. Mm-hmm. Now we should note that Hampton Street, as of the latest check, 30% of the population in Hampton Street is classified as ESL. And language acquisition is not a one-year thing. And our youngest learners, they come in, we have a big turnover of population, but 30% of a building, you're not going to see proficiency. You'll see growth, but you're not going to see the proficiency. It's typical for the population. It also speaks to if you're sending only 35% of your children proficient into third grade and they're sitting for the state exam the first time, what kind of numbers do we anticipate from that? Math, overall in the district, we do much better. For some reason, we have a lot of good math brains in our kids, and unlike me, we have much better performance across the board in math. Now, when we get to Jackson, I did something very different this year. So what I found, and when we met with Pat and Ed and the principals, last year, 13-14, the NWA scores and the state scores were pretty much on target. When we looked at proficiency of NWEA, it was in 5-10 points, the max of the state scores. This year, we see no correlation in English. It's all over the place. I'll demonstrate that in a second. Math is better. There's a lot more alignment between the NWA math and the state math, but the ELA isn't. But what I'm going to show you also are teacher scores on the state test and teacher scores on what we call VARC, which is the NWEA version of a state score. Now, this is the old APPR. Now, why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because it's really hard to make any sense out of it. And I'm trying to paint a picture or put in perspective for you. When we look at these scores and try to speak to teachers about what kids are doing and what they're doing, it's kind of a silly conversation. So here's the third and fourth grade. The numbers on the left are just teacher numbers. They're not in any kind of order. It's completely random. It's not alphabetical. It's not any, you're not going to figure it out, so don't try. There's ESL in there, there's special ed in there. It's irrelevant who the teacher is. What I'm showing here is very interesting, though. The first column are the percent of the class that was proficient in reading in September of last year. The second column is the proficient in reading at the end of the year. And you can see in every case except one, you had gains. The overall class was more proficient in the spring. And the test is normed that way, so you can't say, well, we're not using the same score. It's a different score because, again, it's nationally normed. So the first highlight I have there, 4-2, look at the gains that class made. 29% to 81% proficient. And when those same children took the state exam, only 31% were proficient. Jeez. 50 points. Makes no sense. In fact, if you look at the second and third column down the line, the discrepancy of 40 points or more, very few are less than that. So right off, it's sending up flags on that ELA. The next three columns are the same thing for math. And you look at the gains, by and large, there was a gain in every single class. Children were more proficient at the end of the year than they were in the beginning of the year. And these numbers, the SCATE scores, are not so drastic. You're not jumping 40 points. They're within 10 points in most cases. And then we have a generated teacher score for VARC, which is the NWA side. That's a real growth score. That's start of the year, end of the year, all the kids in the class, controlling for variables. We control for economically disadvantaged, for ESL, for IEPs. So it's all statistically controlled. The last column are the state scores. Now, I believe I showed the board a video on how the state calculates their scores. It's fairly convoluted, but basically what they do is they group children on the score they received last year. So every kid that got a raw score of 300, they put in one bucket. And then out of that bucket, they say, okay, how many of those 300s are special ed? We'll take them out and put them in the special ed 300 bucket. And how many of those are special ed, 300, and economically disadvantaged, and we put them in a different group. So the state makes all these different buckets, and they sort children in those. And then everybody takes the test again. They go back to the bucket and say, okay, everyone in the bucket, how did you do on this year's test? How much did you grow? And they only compare them to who is in the bucket. And they give every kid a score. Your minus, your plus, and then they take that score they give a child and then give it to a teacher. And they average all the teacher scores together to come up with a teacher score. Now, if that sounds convoluted to you, it's because it is. And there's not a ton of validity. I mean, if you look at the scores on the state, they're radically different than the growth scores from NWEA. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the middle school, it doesn't change. Now, the middle school, we have teachers that only teach English and social studies and math and science. So the two columns are, that's what they're showing, the subject area teachers. But it's the same thing. The ELA proficiency numbers are radically different than the class. The math are closer, and the teacher scores, by and large, are all over the place. Math much better than the ELA. So some of the conclusions, you don't want to be an ELA teacher, period. Pick another subject because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But something is very wrong. Either NWA has absolutely no clue of how they're correlating, or the state has absolutely no clue of how they're correlating. So after we looked at this, the next look we did was, well, how did the same children do on the state exam last year? So before I move ahead, did this all make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so now, this gets a little... What I'm trying to do here is look at what I call like pairs. Same kids year to year. So the first column is 2015, and we ranked the mean rank. So you see ELA 4, 67%. So what are this year's fourth graders, how did when they were in third grade, how did they do on the test? So you see there below it, 2014, it lines up with ELA 3. And that group did slightly better, 68.8. So the change was a negative 1.8. So if you look at that change column going across, it's relatively flat with some wild jumps.
Yeah.
You know, ELA 8, you got negative 23. And in Math 7, you got negative 23. So then we took a look at, well, how many kids did we pair? Because there was an opt-out movement, so a bunch of children didn't take the test. So did that have any significance on the numbers? And you look, I'll take you to ELA 8 with that giant negative 23. The first day, there was 33% opted out. The second day, 14 more kids said, I'm not taking the test. Well, the problem with that is if you put your name on the test, you get a score. So 14 children who stopped taking it all received a 1, and those 1s factored into that number. So the large percentage, probably the same thing with Math 7 and negative 23, it was the second largest opt-out we had at 30%. So it throws the numbers off.
Right.
My best guesstimate is if everyone took the test, we would see a positive change year to year with the same children. And if it wasn't a positive change, it would be slight negative. And there's variables for that. Things like Math 6, we blew the county away in Math 6. You know, and those kids are strong. And the year before, they had 87%. That's a strong cohort in math. I would imagine next year they're going to have similar numbers. The fifth grade, not so much. You ask 2 different exams. They look at one exam as easier than, when I talk to the teachers, they feel one exam is easier than another. But again, there's a skewing of the data here, so I don't know what kind of conclusions we're supposed to reach. But I can tell you my favorite stat of the night is going to be algebra. So you know our practice is that every single student in the 8th grade sits for the algebra exam. This is the first year where every children had to take the new Common Core test. So how'd they do? Well, with 180 students sitting for the test, we had an 85% pass rate, including all ESL and special ed. And the special ed number is huge. It's a fantastic passing rate for the number of kids with IEPs. That's not supposed to happen. If you look at, well, it's hard to do a state average because not everybody takes the test. Typically, only the brightest kids in 8th grade take the test. And you can see it would have been 56 kids because in earth science, only 2 classes took earth science. So we accelerated in earth science in 8th grade, but not in algebra. So there isn't a comparison statewide because typically 8th grade, your smartest kids take the test at very high pass rates. That's not supposed to happen. You look at that group of children's 7th grade scores, it's below 50%. When they took the 7th grade math test, only half of them passed. It's a tribute to our teachers. I can't speak. I am so proud of our 8th grade math teachers to pull off numbers like this. And what this does for children is it allows them to set their sights on calculus. You cannot get to calculus if you don't take algebra in 8th grade. This is something we've worked on when I was principal, when Ed was principal, when Whitney's principal. It is a huge achievement in the district, and I'm going to show you how it plays out. So our Regents results. When you look at our Regents results by cohort, so this is current 10th graders. There's a little difference here because these children were allowed to take the old geometry and the new geometry, and they focused on the old geometry, and you can look at the pass rates there. On the old test was 91, on the new test was 71. These children that didn't have a choice, next year have to take the new geometry. They don't have a choice anymore. With the exception of earth science, all significant in the 90s. The pass rates are in the 90s. Same happens when you move ahead to our current juniors. Chemistry 100%, living environment biology 93, global 92. All of those are required for graduation, or chemistry is not. But now here's an interesting phenomenon, and if I get upset about anything with the state, I am incredibly angry about Algebra 2 trigonometry. I'm flat out angry about it. They changed the exam and made it very difficult. And they didn't have to do that because next year it's the new test. So next year the children will take the old test and the new test. What's significant about this is these were sophomores. So we had a large group of sophomores sitting, and they made the test impossible. It's county-wide. The results county-wide were lower than they've ever been. As soon as the test was given, the listservs lit up. What's going on with trig? Those of you that follow, the SAT has changed. They're pushing calculus into the SAT, which you typically take in your junior year. They're changing trigonometry to push calculus into trigonometry. It's becoming a much different course than it's ever been. So there was no reason to make a more difficult test. Next year it's going to be more difficult because it's a new exam with new content. And it's not fair to kids. They didn't have an option of taking an old test or a new test, and they didn't know they were going to make it a ridiculous test. So it's not right. We had several children take it again in August, which is very difficult because it's not, you're in the summer, you're not in a regular class, but we did have another number of students pass that brought that passing rate up to 79. Same phenomena happened to the students that took algebra trig here as well. So these are our current seniors. And again, by and large, physics, I want to note, has not been a great, passing. Everyone passed the physics Regents. I don't have the graduates up here, so the graduates also, their results I don't have here. But again, by and large, there's a huge difference when you look at these numbers. How can we produce children going through 3 to 8, taking exams with low proficiencies, and when they take Regents exams, we have such high passing rates? And it's not because they're easier exams, because we have them on the tougher exams as well. So it begs the question, what are we trying to do? What are we doing all this for? You know, the Common Core standards were supposed to be college and career ready. That's the buzzword. And they say the 3 to 8 testings are supposed to predict how you're going to do in college. I don't know that it's doing that. So what are some other things we could look at? Well, let's look at our graduating class from last year. We had a graduation rate of 97.8. That means 4 students didn't graduate. One of them came to the district as a 17-year-old immigrant that did not speak English. And when you're 17, starting high school, the odds of you completing are not very good. But they still count as a dropout. The other three, oh, and by the way, I asked Mr. Escobar, who were the 4 kids that didn't graduate? He rattled off the names in an instant. I said to him, well, what's going on with them? He says, check with the high school, but I'm pretty sure they passed all of the exams, they just need credits. So sure enough, I called Dr. Smith. He rattles off all 4. I call Jenny Fahey in charge of guidance. She rattles off all 4. Already told me whose mother she spoke to. Already knew exactly what they needed and is working to move these 3 to graduation. It's pretty unusual, by the way, that the exams are all passed. Most of the time, the exam is what hangs a kid up. It's not the course credit, and that's just a come into school issue. But that's a pretty good number. And it's not like we don't know and not working on the kids that didn't graduate. And I fully expect that number will change. They do calculate a 5-year cohort percentage. So if somebody finishes in the 5th year, they'll raise the number. They'll raise the percentage. Same group, 71% Regents diploma rate. That means you pass trigonometry along with 2 science, a language, 2 social studies, 1 English. And what am I missing? 2 science, 2 social studies, 2 math, 1 English, 1 language, 8. That number rivals any district that touches us. Last year, it was comparable to Herrick's. We had a higher Regents diploma rate than Herrick's. I don't let that superintendent forget that, although he retired, so I have to call him at home this year. What are some other indicators? AP and college coursework, a goal of this board. More children should take college exams. How do you know if you're college and career ready? Well, if you take a college course, you kind of know. 78% of the class took at least an AP or a college level class. We set huge numbers for how many exams we administer. 28 AP scholars, 8 national scholars. To be a national scholar, you must take a minimum of 8 APs, and you must score at least a 4 on each of them. Let's pause and think about that. You really don't take an AP until your sophomore year. So in 3 years, you took at least 8 exams, and on each of those, you got a 4 or better. Just to give you an idea, Garden City had 14 national scholars, and they have 100 more children than we do. Just to put it in some kind of perspective for you. College acceptances, 92% go to college, 62 to 4 years, 30 to 2 years. This has been a presenting problem in this community. Well, let me get to 30% in a second. So of those 62% that go to 4-year schools, what kind of schools are they going to? Well, Barron's has a competitive scale. Barron's will categorize colleges based on average SAT score, average GPA, and the acceptance rate. So if you're a college that's highly selective, like to give you an idea, an Ivy may accept 8% of the kids that apply. Middle level competitive college, 20%. By comparison, Adelphi is 72% acceptance rate, to give you some kind of global look at that. So of those 62% of children that are going, 62, happens to be the same percentage, 62% of them are going to the most competitive colleges in the country. We're producing children that want to go to 4-year schools. They're getting into very competitive schools. And we also know that the 30% that go to 2-year schools do not have a good persistent rate. We don't have a good graduation rate. The persistence meaning they stay in school, they earn the associates, and then move on to a 4-year school. those of you not aware, if you go to Nassau Community, you then could go to any SUNY school once you have your associate's degree. The state connection. That's why last year we started this program with Queensborough. This year we have 2 sections of Introduction to Robotics, which will earn Queensborough credits. And those credits we're purposely setting up for a certificate called Information Technology Certificate, which is equivalent to 1 full year of college. So if our children start Intro to Robotics in sophomore year and continue with the coursework we're going to provide, our goal is for them to graduate with a certificate. So when you say college and career ready, those children will be both. They'll have a certificate that'll get them a better paying job when they leave. If they want to continue college, they have a year of worth of credits under their belt. So these are the kind of things that when you look at, well, what are they talking about this college and career ready? These are other indicators that you can look at, and this community can be very proud of. And I know our teachers in our high school are very proud of this. So it begs the question, how do you measure a school district? And to steal this phrase, school district's much more than scores. And particularly this school district. Our mission and strategic objectives are very clear. We want to inspire children to be a lifelong learner, pursue excellence, exhibit strength of character, contribute positively to a global society. And we do all of those things. The easiest is our Student Service Center. The number of children that participate in our Student Service Center that contribute to the society is a huge number. We don't celebrate it. Why? Why is a good district a number, and then we compare that number to a completely other district that's nothing like us? And we're going to say something, we're going to base those numbers to rate ourselves. It's not a competition. The real fact is, are children aspiring to be lifelong learners? Do they love to learn, and are they working hard? And that's what we're really trying to focus on. This year, I've outlined for the board our new initiative is to try to recognize all of these things in students. All of these things that students do in their society, and when they exhibit empathy, and when they have grit and perseverance. And if they love, Lego, why not recognize that they love Lego? And we could do all of this with badges. We're going to start an electronic badge program. It's not to judge kids. It's not to grade kids. It's to recognize what they do. Because we are producing citizens into this country that think everything is about a score. And there's a lot of value in doing what you like to do. So that's my snapshot, and my soapbox, and all wrapped up into one. Does the board have any questions on this?
I do have something. I didn't see this before the meeting, so I was going to show this to you later on, because this is the kind of thing we talk about as a board. I got to go to a lecture about the aims of education, given by one of our professors at Hofstra from the psychology department, introducing to first-year students the ideas of John Dewey. And this is how he began the lecture. Can you think of a task or a time when you were so engrossed in learning something that step followed step, discovery followed discovery, that required a lot of effort but felt somehow effortless and led you to something you were proud of? What makes it different from something you must force yourself to learn? And then he went on to say, what do you think are the vices of imposed ends? That was written in 1935.
Yep.
Yeah. So these aren't necessarily new ideas. They're new to us. I was shocked to find out that this was written at that time. But there's certainly ideas that are important to revisit to get back to what was always important. So, yeah. You talk about formative and summative assess for teachers, too. I mean, that's...
Where,
It's as simple as that.
you know, a sidebar where I really commend the board is you give me very clear direction that you don't want to teach with tests. You don't want to drill and kill kids. You want good teaching and learning. And our practices represent that and reflect that. Not every district does that. A lot of districts complain about the exams, or they complain about the Common Core, but it's within their power to change it. You recognize that, and you have very clear direction that this is the way we want to go. And it's the right thing to do for children. And all the other stuff that we do with STEAM and with, you know, science in the younger grades and the Fab Lab we're going to put in is based on this philosophy that we're going to produce kids that understand technology, that collaborate with others, that are creative, that don't have to regurgitate a fact. They could think on their own. So when they get out into the world, they hit the ground running. And I'm so proud to be part of this journey because this is what everybody should be doing. And I'm lucky enough to get to do it. And I know my colleagues feel the same way. So I want to thank you for that. But again, I'm off my soapbox.
Anybody else? Thank you for this.
So those are my presentations for the evening. I am in need of an executive summary to discuss negotiations.
I just want to add, this is a lot of information, I think, for everybody to take in. And I do think it's important that we sort of look at the end product, for lack of a better word. I don't like to compare children to products, but at the same token, in looking at, I think, the kind of high school students that we do produce, it's almost like this, that's more the starting point in some ways for us to kind of take that and work backwards. It is confusing, I will say, some of these tests, and I'm hoping that as things progress in Albany, and I saw Governor Cuomo is now
We also have a new
drawing
testing
out
company
some
this year,
things.
so you know, that throws a new wrinkle in it too.
There's a whole lot of things. I think it's important for us to keep our nose to the grind and continue forward, because I do believe that we're absolutely on the right path. We can always do things better. We can always tweak it. But I too am very, very optimistic and hopeful, and I think we're there. It's just a matter of getting the rest of the world maybe sometimes to see it that way. But I think more and more our parents are, our kids are, and I think it's really exciting to keep going in the way and where we're going. So looking forward to more of these presentations. I know I had an idea already. I'd like to see the robotics class. I'd like to see
Here?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would. Actually,
We can bring
I would.
them in.
I'd like to